Today I want to talk about food as medicine. Because of all the levers you have for preventing cognitive decline, what you eat is one of the most powerful ones you have, especially given that you have multiple opportunities each and every day to nourish and take care of your one and only brain. Now, back in episode 256, I did a deep dive on the mind diet, as in the eating pattern that has been shown to reduce the risk of dementia by as much as 53%. And in that episode, I talked about the food groups you want to eat more of and the foods you want to limit. So in this episode, I want to help you understand why it works, especially how it addresses what Dr. Dean Sherzai, one of the leading Alzheimer's researchers and neurologists in the country, calls the Four Horsemen of Alzheimer's. So after you listen to this episode, which is again really all about why adopting this eating pattern is brain protective, I highly recommend, if you haven't listened to it yet, to go back and listen to that previous one for the specifics on how to get started. All right? And as always, this is education, not medical advice. So for decisions about your own health or a loved one's care, please work with a qualified healthcare provider. Okay? Let's get into it. Well, hi there, Amy here. Thank you so much for joining me today, and welcome back to another episode of Happy and Healthy with Amy. If you listened to my last few episodes on the latest Alzheimer's anti-amyloid drug treatments and the role of neural inflammation, you heard me use the wildfire metaphor to describe the progression of Alzheimer's disease, where the presence of amyloid plaques is like a lit match, and tau tangles is a brush fire, and neural inflammation is a wildfire, when the rate of cell death is 10 times higher. And I talked about what makes for more dangerous wildfire conditions. We're talking dry brush, low humidity, high temps, and strong winds, right? Any of these makes a spark more dangerous. And all of them together, right, a match becomes a disaster in the making. It's catastrophic. So today I want to discuss what the equivalent of these conditions are in the brain. And I want to use a framework from Dr. Dean Sherzai. He's a neurologist, researcher, and the co-author of The Alzheimer's Solution with his wife, Dr. Ayesha Sherzai. So he describes 4 core drivers that together represent 90% of what determines the disease progression in Alzheimer's. He calls them the 4 horsemen: lipid dysregulation, glucose dysregulation, chronic inflammation, and oxidation, or more precisely, oxidative stress. So these 4 are the dangerous wildfire conditions for your brain. And the food you eat either makes these conditions better or worse. So I want to help you understand how the mind diet addresses all 4. And it's not through perfection or eating one magical food, but by consistently creating a healthier environment for the brain. Okay, so what exactly is the mind diet? Well, first, MIND is an acronym. M is for Mediterranean dash, I is for intervention for, N is for neurodegenerative, and D is for delay. So Mediterranean dash, intervention for neurodegenerative delay. I like to say it's what you get if the the Mediterranean diet and the DASH diet had a baby. So it's not a diet or a meal plan like you would use to try to lose weight, okay? But rather a healthy eating pattern that focuses on the foods with the strongest evidence for brain health. So it was developed by Dr. Martha Claire Morris and her team at Rush University. And in their cohort studies, they found that people who followed the MIND diet closely had up to a 53% lower risk of Alzheimer's. Even a moderate adherence showed a 35% lower risk. Now, one caveat, these studies were observational studies, right? So we're talking association, not causation. But the direction was consistent, and it's been replicated. And actually, an important update, since I covered this in episode 256, the U.S. Pointer study, which is a randomized control trial designed to test whether structured lifestyle interventions could protect cognitive function in older adults, right? And specifically those at higher risk for cognitive decline, used the MIND diet as its dietary component. And the results that were published in the Journal of the American Medical Association, JAMA, back in 2025, showed that both the control group, which was a self-guided group, and the intervention group that received more structure and accountability and intervention intensity, both groups improved cognitive function. So where the cohort study by Dr. Morris was observational, the U.S. Pointer study is a randomized control trial. Okay, so again, for the full breakdown of the food groups that you want to embrace and the ones you want to limit, listen to episode 256. I've put the link in the show notes or the description, right? So now let's talk about why these foods work. Because when you understand the mechanism, the eating pattern stops feeling like a chore and starts feeling like a huge opportunity. Okay, so let's go through the four horsemen or drivers, core drivers of Alzheimer's. And I'm going to walk through them in the order that I think makes the most sense biologically. Okay, and then as we go, I want you to notice how they connect. Because these aren't four separate issues. They interact. They amplify each other. And together, they create an internal environment where the brain is more vulnerable to damage. All right, so let's start with the first driver, glucose dysregulation. What you may know as insulin resistance or type 2 diabetes or prediabetes or high blood sugar or high A1C. Okay, so in the wildfire metaphor, glucose dysregulation would be low humidity. So humidity or moisture, right, protects the forest. It keeps the environment from becoming brittle and dry and highly flammable. And when humidity is low, the grass dries out, right? The trees dry out. The whole landscape loses resilience. So glucose regulation works in a similar way. Okay, your brain is an energy-hungry organ. It needs a steady, reliable fuel supply to function well. But when blood sugar is repeatedly too high, and when insulin isn't able to work effectively, or when cells become insulin resistant, the brain's energy system becomes less efficient. And instead of steady fuel, the system becomes stressed, right? So instead of resilience, there's vulnerability. And this matters beyond just blood sugar, okay? Insulin resistance doesn't just stay in one lane. It can affect your blood vessels, your mitochondria, which are like tiny power plants inside your cells, as well as the way the brain uses energy in ways that extend well beyond glucose metabolism. So the MIND diet helps by emphasizing fiber-rich foods, okay, leafy greens, vegetables, beans, whole grains, nuts, and berries, along with healthy fats from foods like salmon, nuts, and olive oil. Okay, so together, these foods can help support steadier blood sugar. Think premium gas and more moisture, right? And a more resilient metabolic environment. And then limiting refined carbohydrates and sweets and ultra-processed foods that can dry out the system. Okay, the second driver is lipid dysregulation. So in the wildfire metaphor, lipid dysregulation is the dry brush. So dry brush is fuel for the wildfire, right? And it can build up quietly over time. You may not notice it at first. But when enough dry brush accumulates, the landscape becomes much easier to ignite and much harder to protect. So in the body, lipid dysregulation includes things like high LDL, high triglycerides, low HDL, poor cholesterol transport, and vascular plaque risk. And this matters because the brain needs healthy blood vessels and good blood flow to deliver, among other things, oxygen, glucose, nutrients, right? And to help clear waste. So when LDL particles are high, especially when they enter artery walls, they contribute to plaque formation and vascular injury. And over time, that makes blood vessels less flexible and potentially less able, right, to nourish the brain. So while you've probably been told high LDL is a heart health issue, now you know it's also a brain health issue. Okay, so how does the MIND diet help here? Well, it's rooted, again, in the Mediterranean and DASH dietary patterns. So it emphasizes olive oil and nuts and fish and beans and whole grains, right? These are foods that support vascular health while limiting saturated fats and ultra-processed foods. So in our wildfire metaphor, the second way the MIND diet works is it helps clear the dry brush. Okay, in other words, it helps protect the blood vessels that nourish the brain. Now, the third driver is oxidative stress. In the wildfire metaphor, oxidative stress is high temperatures, right? Heat makes everything more volatile. So when temperatures are high, right, fires ignite more easily. They burn hotter and they spread faster. So think of oxidative stress as a form of biological heat, okay? And it happens when the body produces more free radicals than it can neutralize with its antioxidant defenses. Now, to be clear, okay, oxidation is normal, right? It's part of being alive. But oxidative stress can damage cell membranes, mitochondria, blood vessels, proteins, DNA, and synapses. So in plain English, it's kind of like undue wear and tear at a cellular level, right? So for those of you who are familiar with horses or like Westerns, right, I'm reminded of the expression, rode hard and put away wet. Right? Not how you want to take care of a horse that you care about. And here's where the drivers start to connect. So glucose dysregulation can increase oxidative stress. Lipid dysregulation becomes more dangerous in an oxidative environment because oxidative stress can turn LDL into oxidized LDL, which is more damaging to artery walls and more likely to trigger an immune response. So if lipid dysregulation is the dry brush, oxidative stress is the high heat that makes that brush more likely to ignite. Okay? And the mind diet helps because it's eat more foods, right? The leafy greens, the berries, the olive oil, nuts, beans, and vegetables are rich in antioxidants, polyphenols, flavonoids, carotenoids, and vitamin E. So these foods aren't magic. They don't create a force field around the brain, right? But they give the body more of the natural materials it needs to defend itself, to manage oxidative stress. So the third way the mind diet helps, it lowers the heat. Right? It helps reduce the oxidative wear and tear on brain cells and blood vessels and mitochondria. And the fourth driver is chronic inflammation. In the wildfire metaphor, chronic inflammation is the strong winds. Wind spreads the fire, right? It carries embers. It can turn a small local brush fire into a fast-moving, out-of-control wildfire. So chronic inflammation seems to work in exactly that way. And notice I said chronic inflammation because just like stress, inflammation is not always bad, right? Acute inflammation is part of healing. But chronic inflammation is different. It's like a fire alarm that never shuts off. And notice how it connects to everything we've talked about. Glucose dysregulation promotes it. Lipid dysregulation promotes it. Oxidative stress triggers more of it. And once chronic inflammation takes hold, it can worsen insulin resistance. It can damage blood vessels. It seems to activate the brain's immune cells past the point of helpfulness. And then that accelerates neurodegeneration. So this is why inflammation is the wind. It doesn't just sit quietly. It spreads the problem. It intensifies the problem. And to make matters worse, high blood pressure is often a downstream consequence of chronic vascular inflammation. So damaged, stiffened vessels make the heart work harder, right? This is why the DASH component of the mind diet sits inside an anti-inflammatory eating pattern. So the fourth way the mind diet works is it helps calm the winds, right? It helps turn down the chronic inflammatory signals that can keep the Alzheimer's fire spreading. So let's bring the full metaphor together. Amyloid is a lit match. Tau is a brush fire. Neuroinflammation is a wildfire. And the four core drivers create the conditions that make that wildfire more likely to spread. So glucose dysregulation is like low humidity, right? The brain's energy system becomes less efficient and less resilient. Lipid dysregulation is like dry brush. The vascular system becomes less flexible and more restricted. Oxidative stress is like high temperature, right? Cellular stress makes the whole system more vulnerable. And then chronic inflammation is like strong winds. It spreads and amplifies the fire. And that is why the mind diet is not just about eating brain foods. It's not just blueberries and leafy greens, although they are wonderful, okay? The deeper reason the mind diet matters is that it helps change the internal conditions. It helps restore metabolic resilience, right? It helps protect the blood vessels. It creates more moisture, more metabolic moisture. It reduces the amount of dry brush. It helps lower the oxidative heat. And it helps calm the inflammatory winds. All with one eating pattern. Now, I want to be perfectly clear. I've talked to lots of folks who told me their mom or dad ate really healthy and exercised their whole life, but still developed Alzheimer's. I am not saying the mind diet is a cure for or will prevent Alzheimer's disease, right? In fact, nutrition is only one of the 8 protective factors for brain health in the Restored Protocol. And if you have high cholesterol or high A1C, the mind diet is definitely not a replacement for medical care, right? Diagnosis or working with your physician and taking meds. But at the same time, I want you to remember that food is one of the most powerful tools you have in the prevention toolkit. And every meal, multiple times a day, right, we can be helping to create a more resilient, more Alzheimer's resistant brain. All right, so if I've done my job well in this episode, you're now itching to find out how to implement the mind diet. And the first thing you need to know is what foods to eat and what foods to limit. Again, I reviewed all of these in episode 256. Okay, and to help you implement, I've created a wallet-sized version that you can print out and take with you wherever you go. And you can also put a copy on your fridge, right? So to download it, just go to moxie-club.com/wallet or use the QR code on the screen right here if you're watching this on YouTube. All right? Now, before I wrap up, if you're a midlife woman who wants to protect her brain, especially if you have a family history of Alzheimer's, please subscribe. I don't know where the button is, all right? I publish a new episode every week on Wednesdays. And if you found something useful in this episode, please consider liking and sharing it. All right? So I want to wrap things up with a quote by Thomas Edison. "The doctor of the future will give no medication, but will interest his patients in the care of the human frame, diet, and in the cause and prevention of disease."